and welcome to the South Asian Occupational Therapy Experience podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about religion. I have two amazing guests with me, Mirna Yusuf and Dinuli Senaratne.
Hi, so my name is Mirna Yusuf. I'm a first-year MOT student at Temple University in Philadelphia. I'm a first-generation Bengali American and a practicing Muslim raised in a Muslim household. I was born and raised in Philadelphia, and my family immigrated from Bangladesh.
My name is Dinuli Senaratne, and I'm a newly qualified occupational therapist. I work at the Royal Free Hospital in London. I am based in the UK. I've lived in the UK for 20 years, and I was born and bred in France, where I lived there for 11 years. So I'm French national. I'm Christian. I was brought up as a Catholic, and I also follow Buddhism. I'm ethnically Sri Lankan, so my parents are Sinhalese, and yeah.
I'm Sheela Ivlev. I am a Bengali American, so I'm a first-generation American. I have a private practice in San Francisco, and I was raised practicing Hinduism and Buddhism, and now I consider myself agnostic, though I do have cultural practices with both of those religions. So I'm going to give just a little bit of background on religions in South Asia, Hinduism being about 64% of the population, Islam 29%, Sikhism, Buddhism, and Christianity are only about 2%. But that varies by country as well. So the countries that have the most practicing Buddhist people are Sri Lanka and Bhutan. Islam in Afghanistan, it's about 99% of the population. Bangladesh, Maldives, 100% of the population, and Pakistan. And Hinduism is the majority of India and Nepal. So I think the best place to start us off is by talking about what the difference between religion and culture is. I know that we talk a lot about culture in occupational therapy, but we don't really specifically talk about religion.
Yeah, so for me personally, I hold religion in a higher regard than culture. For me, religion has specific teachings, rules, guidance in how we live our day-to-day life. There are religious texts to refer to when learning about different practices and the reasoning behind them. To me, culture is something that is more society creates, and society develops these values based on their personal beliefs, attitudes, values, which is then collectively becomes common practice. Culture can be changed and altered in some ways, but religion to me is something that is like set, and the words really can't be changed, especially when they're coming from text, but they can be misinterpreted.
For me, I would say I have two different kind of views. Because as I mentioned, I kind of follow Buddhism through my Sri Lankan heritage, and I'm also Christian. So I would say, I guess in terms of like defining culture and religion, I would say culture for me is kind of a body of knowledge that's acquired by people through years of being together in one society and community, while religion is the belief system directed towards more kind of supreme deity and gods, and yet this may or may not be accepted by each person in a culture. And I would say, in terms of, as you mentioned, Sheela, Buddhism is really prevalent in Sri Lanka. The majority of people in Sri Lanka are Buddhists, and so in terms of Sri Lankan culture, there's been a huge influence of Buddhism passed on from India, but we also have kind of the colonial occupation, which has left a mark in Sri Lanka's identity from being colonized by the Portuguese before, and Dutch and British elements. So which have kind of like have intermingled with various traditional facets of Sri Lankan culture. But also we have Indonesian cultures that's influenced certain aspects of Sri Lankan culture. But culturally, Sri Lanka's possess strong links to both India and Southeast Asia. And I think we have like a really strong, a lot of like rich artistic traditions in Sri Lanka that encompasses, for example, music, dance, visual arts, and Sri Lanka is really known for cricket, as you might know, like the cuisine and kind of holistic medicine practice. We're known for our tea, cinnamon, gemstones, so the tourism industry. So I think, yeah, I would say kind of culture is quite wide. It kind of encompasses a lot of different aspects, but I would definitely say that I follow a lot of traditions from Sri Lankan culture, and I guess that involves Buddhism, which I see as a way of life, and some people might see it as a religion, but it's integrated within my culture, because I go, for example, to the temple for as a community with other Sri Lankans with my family, and we might do some meditations there, almsgiving, and so on. And I'm very involved in like Kandyan dancing as well, which has a lot of roots in Buddhism as well, and spirituality and everything. So yeah, and then in terms of religion, obviously Christianity for me, that I kind of see Christianity more as a religion for me, rather than culture, I would say. But so yeah, I guess I've got a kind of multifaceted view of culture and religion.
Yeah, both of you gave beautiful examples and explanations, and I'd say from my perspective, what I'm really able to see is that over time, religion really influences culture, right? And Sri Lanka is a country where you can really see those influences over time with things like coloniality and just the proximity of other countries and their influences. So then that brings us to the difference between spirituality and religion.
Both, it's funny because both spirituality and religion, they're often used interchangeably, despite having quite different contexts. So I would say spirituality is more of a human quality or state, I would say, specifically the state of being related to a spirit. So spirit itself as an entity, a force, or an energy. It can be incorporated into our lives to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the extent to which we're able to experience it. So I guess in terms of the idea of spirituality, it can be central to a person's being, and expressed through engagement in occupation, connection between occupation and spirituality, and occupations, as we know, they're activities that individuals engage in, which are meaningful and purposeful to those participating in them. So spiritual occupations are those occupations that are core to one's sense of self. And so, yeah, if spirituality then if it's a state of being, religion then is a human institution, I think, maybe to celebrate or honor what's perceived as the divine. So in terms of religion, I think it really has a role on making meaning of illnesses in someone's life. So in terms of what we believe in and our systems of practice and the ways in which we participate in our religion and respond to the world, it kind of it shapes and forms different aspects in the way in which illnesses are perceived and responded to by individuals and communities. So I think religion is a really powerful force for shaping a person's understanding of their condition. So yeah, I think it's really important in terms of for OTs to understand kind of the differences between spirituality and religion influence, not only because of how our clients experience their condition, but also because how they respond to the challenges that those illnesses present in their lives, and how they engage in therapeutic interventions.
Yeah, didn't really give a really great explanation. But I think that spirituality has similar attributes to religion, in the sense that there is a belief or feeling that is beyond what we can see or experience as humans. There's a belief in something divine, making connections with something that's higher than us or beyond us as humans. And spirituality, I think, can be more individualized experience. Some people are more or less, and same thing with religion. Some people are more or less religious. Religion, I think, is more structured. There are some rules, there are some teachings, there's some guidance, there's history, but spirituality is like kind of left up in people's own interpretation. There isn't anything like specific, like this is what spirituality is. But religion, Islam or Buddhism or Hinduism, like there's certain practices that are structured there that people choose or don't choose to practice.
I'll add on for myself, from my personal experience, similar to what you mentioned, Mirna, there with religion and spirituality, there's a spectrum depending on the individual's beliefs. And based on my upbringing and my present beliefs, I feel that I'm more spiritual than religious. So I love hearing both of your explanations, and I think there's so much more to it. But we are going to try to stick to religion for this episode. So I wanted to ask each of you to talk a little bit about the significance of religion in your own life.
I grew up in a Muslim household, so from early on age, I would go to weekend school to learn how to read the Quran, how to pray, learn the basic teachings about Islam. But oftentimes it was very hard to see the line between culture and religion because they were so mixed. And I also think that because I have family that has immigrated from, a majority country that actually practices. And from my own experience, I know a lot of the teachings are kind of passed by word of mouth. People aren't really able to do their own research and their own kind of exploration. We're just kind of follow what we're told. And I didn't really start doing my own research on Islam and start seeking my own relationship with God, or as in Arabic is Allah, until high school. So I started being around more peers who were practicing Muslims, and I also started learning from them as well, because they weren't South. Some of them weren't South Asian. Some came from Arab cultures or African cultures, and I just kind of was seeing how they were practicing Islam from their perspective as well. And as I was doing my research, I decided to start wearing the hijab as a result. And I noticed that I did get some backlash from relatives, and I noticed changes in behaviors from peers as well. Because culturally, there's a lot of cultures, and in South Asian culture, many people cover their heads with a scarf. That's a cultural practice. But in my experience, I noticed that if someone does it for religious reasons, there tends to be a lot of judgment from my experience, because there's a higher expectation from you as a person to all of a sudden be perfect. And then you become that representative of the religion, in the sense, like, it's difficult to describe because the hijab is seen in a higher regard than if someone were to just cover their head over their with a scarf, just for cultural reasons or for modesty purposes. And I mentioned, like, many Bengali people that I know, they kind of followed what they were told, like I was, and they didn't get to really learn the meanings in the Quran. And the Quran is written in Arabic, and I know that there's a disconnect for many South Asian people who practice Islam, because we're just expected to kind of, these are the practices, follow this, and we're not really given the opportunity to explore their religion and form our own understanding. To me, practicing Islam personally is very important in my day-to-day life. I pray every day, and for me, if I miss prayers or know that I have to make up a prayer, I can kind of get restless, because I'm like, oh my gosh, like I need to do this, because this is a mandatory prayer for me. And even like how I dress, I try to dress modestly. And when I go outside, before I go outside, I wear my hijab every time. Or if there's people in my household that's not my immediate family, the way I dress, I have to dress modestly, and I wear my hijab. I know I'm a student right now, so I hope that, like, understanding not just my religion, but other religions as well would help me in future working as an OT. Like you mentioned in the OCPF, spirituality and religion is an IADL. So it is in our line of work to address it. And for everybody, it's different. You know, some people pick and choose certain aspects that they practice. For example, in Islam, like eating halal, which is like eating meat that is permissible, that is sacrificed or slaughtered in a specific way, is really, really important for certain people. But in my upbringing, that has been mentioned, but because we live in the West and finding halal food is so difficult that like sometimes people don't really think about that. There are some people who are like, no, I will only eat food that is halal. And then there are some people who will eat like pork is not permissible in Islam. So eating like chicken that's not halal, people do it. I've done it. But that's just living in the West. It's very difficult for some people. And then for some people, no, they strictly abide by that. So there's a lot growing up, trying to learn English, trying to learn Bangla, trying to learn Arabic to understand religion. There's just so much that's happening that oftentimes culture and religion is really, really hard to see the fine line between the two.
It encompasses every area of my life. So I was brought up as a Catholic. My mom is very religious. So my sisters and myself, we went through the whole Catholic process since we were born. So from baptism to Sunday school to communion, confirmation, and I'm now a Eucharist minister in my church. So what that means is that I serve the wine, and which is supposed to symbolize the blood of Christ, and the host, communion bread, which is symbolizes the body of Christ in church. So I do that, and I provide it to people in care homes who cannot attend, who can't physically attend church. So, and as I mentioned, in terms of Buddhism, I would also call myself a Buddhist because of my Sri Lankan heritage. So I meditate regularly. So like in the morning when I wake up, and then just before I go to bed, and that kind of like helps me to like remain present in the moment. So I wouldn't, unless I go to the temple and participate in the chanting, I wouldn't do the chanting regularly. But I definitely practice mindfulness meditation and prayer in terms of Christianity. So I regularly pray. But I think with prayer, I think people just think that maybe, especially in Catholic religion, because it's very ritualistic in terms of when you go to church, you have to do certain rituals like kneeling. But I guess as Myrna talked about developing into her religion, I also, as I got older, I developed into my own understanding of my religion, and I delved more into Christianity as I got older. And in fact, I got baptized last year as an adult, because I really wanted, because after delving into Christianity myself and finding out more about the religion, I really wanted to kind of say, right, now I want to kind of, I want to decide as an adult that I want to be baptized and have that relationship with God. So, and I think that's more meaningful when you do it as an adult, because you understand it rather than when you're a baby and somebody else or your parent does it for you. So I think, I had that choice, and, it was like, I give myself to Christ. And so that was really, that was amazing that to do that for myself as an adult. So it was a great experience. And I think in terms of occupation, as Christians, we fast. So at the moment, we're in the period of Lent, just before Easter. And I guess in terms of fasting, there's periods, especially on so I usually tend to fast on Wednesdays and Fridays. And so just kind of have water for most of the day, and then just break the fast in the evening with something light. But in 2017, I actually, so most of the time I just tried to give up something during the Lent period. And in 2017, I decided, I've been vegetarian all my life, but I decided that I wanted to try out veganism. So in 2017, do that for God. And I tried it for 40 days because that's the period of Lent. And it was a revelation to me, because I just felt that, just felt like better through this plant-based journey. And actually that kind of impacted my occupation of eating, because like I started exploring since 2017, going on this plant-based vegan journey, and that's had a massive impact on my life in terms of my nutrition, so yeah, I guess prayer, fasting, reading the Bible, going to church, all these different occupations, meditating, listening to worship songs. So like that's like, for me, that's like, it's really uplifting. I just like listen to it. Really helps my mental health and well-being. Kind of like listening to worship songs. On my commutes, I'll listen to a Bible podcast, or Christian, faith-based podcast, or so. Yeah, it's being able to use my therapeutic use of self of my faith with my patients. It's been really rewarding, not just for me, but obviously, it's made a massive impact for clients. So yeah.
Thank you, Danuli. It's beautiful to hear about using your autonomy and choice to really involve yourself in your religion and make that connection even stronger.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
Speaking for myself, I mentioned this earlier, I don't consider myself very religious. And so I'm more connected to spirituality and culture based on my religious upbringing. And similar to what Myrna said, I'm in San Francisco, and my parents have been here for over 60 years. So growing up, I was in a community where I was the only one that looked like me. I was the only one who, practiced Hinduism, and other than my relatives and communities that my parents kind of pieced together, but those weren't people that I was able to see on a regular basis. And so I found my mom and I separately found Buddhism on our own as I was exploring religion and learning about it, because it's so different when you're not in, your homeland. You're not where people look like you and people are practicing those religious beliefs, and really kind of maintaining like what the scripture says, right? Maintaining those practices. So I think that from the beginning, my family made their own interpretations, just like Myrna said. So we have rules in our religion where you don't eat beef. I eat beef. My dad eats beef, but my mom does not eat beef. We have people in our family that are really devout, and they don't eat meat at all. But it's, again, a personal choice. So for myself, I definitely see the influences in my own life as being more spiritual and cultural with the religious backing, but it's not something that I strictly adhere to. What are some areas of occupation that might be different for somebody who is Muslim?
Yeah, so for practicing Muslims, some areas of occupation I would consider is prayer, dressing, grooming, bathing, toileting, functional mobility, and even social participation. The obligatory prayers are 5 times a day. So before Muslims pray, they perform ablution, which is called wudu. And this is the process of washing the hands, arms, face, feet, rinsing the nose and mouth. And then dressing would come in as wearing clothes that are modest, making sure that the person themselves is clean and a state of purity, which means no urine, feces, blood, dirt that would be present on them or their clothes. And then that actual performing the prayer has a lot of movement. So there's standing, there's bending forward, kneeling down, bowing the head, turning the head, lifting the hands, and then sitting also with their knees bent for a little bit of period of time. And then the dressing considerations, again, women must have hijab on when they're praying, be covered in a modest way. Men must be wearing pants that at least cover their knees. So those are really important considerations when considering the occupation of prayer, which also kind of includes dressing and grooming at the same time, but it's because of hygiene. And then toileting is also really important because other than just religion in Islam, I would like to say that in South Asian cultures, you use water to wash yourselves after using the bathroom. So there's something to hold the water in the bathroom. So, and then in Islam, you use your left hand to wash, because the left hand is usually used for things that are kind of like considered more like impure or dirty or unclean, and the right hand is used for eating, more clean, eating,
Even
drinking.
Hinduism too.
Yeah, if you're giving somebody money, you do it with the right hand. If you're handing something, you would do it with the right hand. Like the hands also kind of like the use of hands is also different. Social participation would be like going to the mosque, attending large prayers, uh, even like people, sometimes families pray together at home, attending Friday prayers, similar to in Christianity, like Sunday prayer. So every week. And functional mobility, like I said, that is really important, especially with the prayer aspect, because you're moving so much and you're doing a lot. And you could probably also incorporate like other things in that, because those movements you're already kind of considering for someone who has to do them for their daily prayer. But even for like ADLs, like brushing your teeth, you're going to need to, use your hands and move and use water and rinse and soap, like all these things. The cleanliness part, the hygiene part also kind of connect together at the same time. And some things to consider is like, for some people, touching someone from the opposite gender is not permissible. So a woman touching a man is not permissible. But here in the US, occupational therapists are mainly female. I think the recent data is like, I think 90% of occupational therapists are female. So considerations for like males, how do you go about explaining that, like what how you as an OT would work to help them? And women, like if they're veiled, how do you do things, like if they're wearing a hospital gown or something, like things to consider, like they want to dress modestly and cover their hair. So those are kind of some things to consider when working with people who do practice Islam.
I have to say, it's listening to Myrna is not as extensive in Christianity and Buddhism. I would say what I can relate to from what you've said, Myrna, is the functional mobility. So in Catholic religion, certainly in churches there's a lot of kneeling, and then they have the rosaries as well. So kind of like using your your fine motor skills with your fingers to do the rosary, say the rosary prayer and beads. And you have beads as well in Islam, don't you?
Yes, there's the tasbih, so they do the same kind of thing, kind of repeating and reciting.
So I guess putting your hands together, being able to do that.
The beads are used as well in Buddhism, and I would say one of the biggest things in Buddhism is really the building the stamina to be able to sit for those that chant. I can say this from an example with my mom. It was mostly speech therapy that she was working with, but my mom had a stroke last year, and her ability to chant is very important to her, right? She has goals that she wants to reach, and it gives her peace of mind, and it's important to her. So my mom actually found an app that does the chanting. And so for a long time, she was just listening, and now she's able to participate with it. And so like finding ways to make accommodations, I think, are really important. In Hinduism, we typically shower before we pray as well. It's really important to be clean. Going into temples, you clean your feet before you go in. And so, some of the considerations I think that are really important is there are these little things that people don't understand with Hinduism, is that like we don't wear shoes. It's disrespectful to wear shoes inside the house. Shoes are dirty, feet are dirty, that left hand is dirty. So just like Myrna said, handing things with the left hand, putting your feet on something or touching something with your feet is just something that we don't do. In Hinduism, we see God in everything and everyone. And so things like paper, books, pretty much anything that isn't the floor is divine, is a part of God. And so we want to be respectful, and we don't touch it with our feet. Similar to what Myrna said, there are all these positions, right? We're kneeling, sitting, bowing. Hindus do something called pranam, that's a greeting. And so being able to access those movements. And if you're not able to, how can you make accommodations for them? And I think similar to all of our religions and cultures, social participation is huge. So these religious functions bring everybody together. And so, you know, in COVID times, trying to help people figure out how can you be able to do that. You know, we have a local priest, and you know, he hosts functions over Zoom, so that people can access their community, pray together, and be able to manage social distancing. And I think again, what all of the religions have in common are these considerations for food, not just what you eat, but also food preparation. So for Myrna mentioned halal, and with Hinduism, we have, if you're vegetarian for religious reasons, you also aren't eating egg or onion or garlic. So what, you know, depending on where you are, if you're in a Western nation, thinking about vegetarianism is different. You know, our diets have kind of specific rules. And again, it's by choice. It's how you adhere to your religious scriptures. There are some things that come to mind with my own family. When my grandmother became a widow, she cooked in her own kitchen because she was strict vegetarian. So she didn't want any of that stuff touching her food or in her kitchen. So she had her very own kitchen that she would cook in. Her attire changed. In Hindu culture, a lot of widows wear white. So you change how you dress depending on a life situation or circumstance. In very strict areas, or very strict beliefs, you know, if a woman is menstruating, she's not able to pray. She's not able to go to religious facilities because of beliefs. And in the same respect, there are specific roles and rituals that really are based on gender. And so in Hinduism, it's only men that can be priests.
So you mentioned like menstruation, like in Islam, like when a woman is menstruating, she doesn't pray. She's not obligated to pray until her menstruation is done. And then once she ends her cycle of menstruating, you shower before you're able to go back to praying again. And then holding the Quran, also you don't do that because you're menstruating. Menstruation is kind of more seen. You're kind of getting like a break from what your religious obligations are. So you're not really held to those obligatory things that you were supposed to do, like praying and reading Quran. Like those are not obligatory for you because that's like a rest period, like a break period for you. And same thing again, like entering mosques, you have to take off your shoes. And like the newly mentioned, like the older populations, like reciting things verbally, memory, attention, like all those things are so important when you're doing prayer, like remembering that like this is what I need to say next, and this is the movement I have to do next. Or sometimes even me, like when I'm praying, I'll forget like halfway, like, oh my gosh, did I do this one time or do it two times? Because there are like certain motions that you have to repeat once or twice. And even just myself, like I forget. And I can imagine like for older populations who have some deteriorating health, that how hard memory must be for them to remember things and verbally say things. Because a lot of practices in Islam is kind of just like memorizing verses from the Quran, memorizing words or phrases that you need to say when you're praying or doing anything. Even like before you eat, you might say something like, you know, people say grace, and we kind of do something similar as well after you're done eating, before you're eating. If you sneeze, you say bless you in Christianity sometimes, and we say alhamdulillah. Like those are all just like things that like, you just kind of, it's all memory based. And my grandma, I know she always complains about how she's like losing her memory. Like when she's praying, she gets really upset because she's like, oh my God, I'm like forgetting halfway like what I'm saying. So those are really, really important things to think about that we might not think. The act of prayer, and then also like remembering what to do, the attention, the focus, the higher like level, like cognitive functions, those are also really, really important to think about.
One thing that I did think about was that my mum would not let us eat until we first go to church on a Sunday, and then we have like lunch, or especially with Christmas as well, is the same. We weren't allowed to to just eat until we go to church first, and then we could open our presents for Christmas and and eat and everything. But it's just we've kind of put God first before our ADL of eating, and so
fasting is really, really significant in a lot of religions, and I think it's really important for practitioners to respect and understand that. At the same time, when you're working with people for health reasons who may have to break those fasts, identifying ways to have those conversations to help the person kind of work through their beliefs in a respectful way while maintaining their health. So, this is where education, I think, is really important. We can't say, well, this is what the doctor said, so who cares what your beliefs are? But really being respectful and helping people understand modifications. Again, with my mom having a stroke, we really had to focus on her nutrition. And so she had to break her, these were self-imposed. She chose to have days of a certain dietary kind of sacrifice. And so we had to talk to her about changing that so that she can recover. So I think these are sensitive conversations, but they're really important to have, especially when you're considering things like Lent and Ramadan. These are strict rules, and understanding what people's beliefs are.
I would just add that there are some gender differences. As I previously mentioned, like women, they don't pray when they're menstruating. They don't physically hold the Quran when they're menstruating. And some people, they have different level of adherence to the religion. So not everybody's going to follow everything with that. I mentioned that men and women do not physically touch one another. So how do you explain that to an OT practitioner that might be working with someone who believes that you should not be touching them? Then women who cover and women who don't. Just, I know, for example, I've had family members who wear hijab, so they take off their hijab when they're in the hospital. But what's an alternative was the scrub caps. It was an alternative that would be given to them to cover their hair, even giving extra blankets or having the curtains pulled over when you're working with a patient, asking people questions about how they dress on a daily basis. That is a really good way, because you're already going to ask that to your patient. So just knowing that, who they interact with often, are they with family all the time, and what does that look like for them? If there are things that they do more outside, what does that look like, dressing wise, and their schedules, prayer times. I think those are also really important, and kind of asking about their day-to-day experience, because that's what OTs do. They kind of build this occupational profile that we talk about, and ask really, really important questions to think about, because you may not be thinking, okay, so the patient that I'm working with, like you mentioned, Ramadan fasting, if they have a medical complication, how do you explain that to them? How do you work around that? Maybe they have to take a medication at 2 p.m. Then is it okay for them to fast until 2 p.m. until they have to take that medication? I've had family members that done that, who can't fast for medical reasons, and they'll fast for a certain period of time, sadly, that they get satisfaction that they were able to at least fast as long as they were able to. And also understanding that in Islam, when you're observing Ramadan, pregnant women are exempt from it. Elderly people who are unable to exempt, if you have medical complications, children who have not hit puberty, you're kind of exempt. And there are, and if you're not able to fast during the month of Ramadan, you are able to make it up later on. So even knowing that could help you with your patients, is this something that you can maybe make up later? Would you consider that, or fasting for a certain period of time and then, doing what you need to do to be medically stable, or that's important for your overall health?
In terms of Christianity, going to church on Sundays, that's important. So, is there a way to help identify transportation to and from church for a patient in a particular facility, or helping them get in and out of the car, if that's not something that they can do? Or if they can't physically go to a church, how can you bring the church to them? So the example that I said, as a Eucharist minister, I go to care homes for people who physically can't attend church to say a prayer for them, and to give them the communion bread, which symbolizes the body of Christ. So I think it's about seeing how, looking at what they were previously doing and seeing how you can bring that to them. And just kind of like really understanding how the practices of their spirituality and religion, how can you, even if they can't physically or do it how they used to be able to do it, how can you try to kind of like to have that same journey for them, like similar journey that they used to have in their current situation. So in prison, as I mentioned, I had I talked about the art therapy. So for example, for someone who was Christian, they wanted to make a cross out of arts and crafts. I had a patient in a hospital. They were blind, and they wanted me to read the Bible for them because they couldn't see. So it's all these, despite people having impairments, or it shouldn't kind of stop them from being able to participate in what's important to their religion and their spirituality. I think we have to, as OTs, we have to think really creatively, think about how can we bring those aspects, that religion and spirituality aspects of what's important to them into their sense of being.
Yeah, I think that was a beautiful way to put it, both metaphorically and like physically. If they can't access religion, how can you bring religion to them? How, whatever values are important to the people that you're working with, how can you help them access it as fully as they're seeking to?
Understanding individuals' lifestyles and behaviors. So, for example, like in my practice, I've used, I think it's, when you're looking at spirituality for people, it's at the core of their being. So just things like providing resources and kind of looking at the supportive relational networks that might be engaged as part of discharge plans. Supportive community reduces the sense of isolation or stigma that many individuals fear, promotion of positive self-perceptions. So, religious practices that are uplifting and affirming can really support independence and engagement in occupation. So faith can really provide a framework for interpreting and constructively coping with daily stresses. Some patients have asked me to work around their schedule in the early morning so that their prayer time is not interrupted. And incorporating spirituality during therapy has been really motivating for them. Like I talked about worship music, that's really been impactful as well in rehab for a patient that I've had, and using Bible quotes as well has been really uplifting. So I had a patient who was completely independent before, and she'd gone through COVID. She was in ICU, and she lost a lot of her functional independence. She couldn't even do the basic sit to stand from the toilet using a Mowbray, so with a frame around. And then I basically one day, whilst during the rehabilitation, I said one of her favorite verses from the Bible, I can do all things through Christ. And I was like, right, let's go. And trying to get her to stand up from the toilet. And you won't even believe it, but she actually stood up, and she couldn't do that before. But that was just so rewarding for me to see, because it's like, wow, religion has a massive impact as a motivation for people to actually be able to do things that people physically couldn't do before. So even when I remember when that patient did like stairs practice as well, like getting on the steps. She with the physiotherapist, we put worship music on, and then afterwards I was like, right, let's go and walk over to your room now. And she was using her walking stick, and I was like, right, should we go and see if we can use it without the walking stick, like the short distance towards her bedroom. And then she did it for the first time. Like, so we rehabbed her from a Sarah steady to walking frame to elbow crutches and then to a walking stick. And then when she first, after 8 weeks of rehab, when she walked without the walking stick with the worship music behind her for the first time in 8 weeks, after all that intense rehab, she honestly just cried, like out of sheer happiness. It's like, and she was just like, wow, I feel like Jesus walking on water right now. Because, you know, it was just so, and for me, I cried as well, because, you know, I just couldn't believe it. Like, just that, the sheer impact, like I said, that it could have on patients. And similarly, I had another patient as well in that rehab unit, again, through using verses from the Bible. She was previously, her baseline was using gutter frame, and she had fluctuated from using a hoist to gutter frame before coming in. And then we rehabbed her again through using spirituality and what was meaningful to her. And then she actually went above her baseline to using elbow crutches from the gutter frame. And it's just, you know, it's like miraculous things have happened through people having that religion aspect during therapy. And it's just been amazing to see. So I've used it, like from the acute setting to intermediate care, like inpatient rehabilitation, to mental health. So I've even used it in prison, which has been really rewarding through art therapy, like, you know, prisoners being able to express their faith using art, and, you know, being referred to the chaplain, to encouraging them to go to church, like giving them a Bible, reading the Bible with them. And, you know, like for people who have got those physical impairments, like they want to be able to know, like, they've asked me, can you teach me again how to kneel? Because that, you know, kneeling for them, like in a church, that's significant. So it's all these, you know, kind of working through the impairments of people, whether it's mental or physical, for them to participate in those occupations that they used to be able to do before, has been really significant. So yeah.
I mean, that is what you've shared. All the real life examples you've shared are really just using religion or spirituality as a powerful therapeutic tool.
I wanted to talk about some misconceptions that people may have about Islam. So kind of misconceptions are about hijab. You know, sometimes we see that some people may consider it like it's forced upon women, or that it's oppressive, which is not true. Women choose to wear the hijab, and there's that. Yes, so there can be a mixture of culture where people may be forced to dress in certain ways that they don't want to. Again, that fine line between culture and religion, that is where kind of that restriction of how we dress, and that's not, I don't want to say that's just only religion, that's culture, that's society, because even as a woman, like the way you dress gets policed a lot anyways. And another misconception is that it is a violent religion, which sometimes in the media it is portrayed that way, which is not true. Oftentimes verses are taken out of context and interpreted in negative ways. And I would say that if you are looking for something negative, you will find it, because you made up your mind about it, because you're looking to find, like, I'm going to find this and I'm going to be like, yes, that fits my narrative of like what I'm looking for. And again, Islamic practices and teachings I mentioned before is in Arabic. So if you don't understand Arabic, you will not get the full understanding, because things get lost in translation, even from English to other languages. Like, they're not in the same context. Some words don't even exist in the language that you're translating in. So which is why it can be difficult for people to learn about Islam and its teachings.
Some therapists, they continue to question whether or not spirituality and religion practices falls within the scope of practice. Well, I would argue that it does fall within the OT scope of practice. And I know that OTs have had they're quite hesitant to address that topic of spirituality because they fear of crossing those boundaries. Despite this concern, in my experience, clients overwhelmingly maintain appropriate boundaries when responding to questions on spirituality. And, you know, as I mentioned, like I've had clients who were motivated to read their Bible. That same client also had a goal of increasing their tolerance for sitting on the edge of the bed, and by incorporating Bible reading at the edge of the bed, the client's performance notably improved. You know, as I took what might have been perceived as an awkward request, I turned it into an effective therapeutic intervention. We talk about kind of client-centeredness and holistic practice as occupational therapists. And I think we really have to kind of live by that and actually, you know, look at what's important to a client and actually be able to own that and not be afraid to be explicit. And, you know, I know there are those kind of that uncomfortable aspect, but even though I've used Christianity in as you know, in my therapeutic use of self and practice, OT practice, whether it's Christianity or another religion, I would use the same techniques as I do. So yeah, I think I would really encourage occupational therapists not to be afraid to really kind of be curious.
A big piece that we learn in OT school is being professional, maintaining professionalism. And so, you know, it's bi-directional. So there's the part of you that you might be afraid to share. And so, you know, along the lines of professionalism, it's just important to keep in mind, like, you're crossing the line when you're imposing your religion on somebody else, right? We definitely don't want to do that. At the same time, I can say in my practice, I do utilize things like mindfulness and yogic breathing and things that do actually have religious and spiritual significance. But the way that I address it is I'm very clear with the people that I'm working with that this is the background, right? This is based on this Eastern philosophy or this Hindu philosophy or this Buddhist philosophy. Are you comfortable with trying these? So I'm not masking it as something that's, you know, something that doesn't have the significance, but being honest of what the background and significance is to make sure that it doesn't conflict with their beliefs. What if your beliefs go against your client's beliefs? I've seen this be more of an issue in my experience than the other way around. I feel like in my practice, people have been pretty open, and because I'm open with what, you know, the modalities that I'm using, they let me know if they have any concerns with it or not. But I have worked with students and practitioners who flat out refused to work on things with clients because it went against their own religious beliefs.
I think it really kind of depends on the situation. For me personally, I don't think the way that I see it, I wouldn't have an issue with helping a client to reincorporate or learn about things that are meaningful to them in a religious concept. Like if they worship in ways that I do not, I would keep in mind that I'm not the one who is actually doing the worship, it's the client. An example is in Islam, we do not worship any idols or figures. That goes against our practice. But if a client wanted to do that, you kind of work on the skills that they need to be able to do that. So if they're bending down in front of, you know, an idol or a statue or a figure, if they need to bow, if they need to put their hands in a certain position, if they need to be standing for long periods of time, I would consider those like the functional aspects of being able to do that worship. I know that I myself would not participate in the act of doing the worship, keeping that in mind, but you can still address those specific components that they need to be able to do while you're addressing other areas that they might need to do functional things, such as like if you're going to pick something up, you're going to have to reach down anyways. That's going to play into bowing. If you're going to, I don't know, if hold something in your hand, in your palms, like very carefully, that could go into just doing like you're doing the hand positions of prayers, like folding your hands and all the other areas. So I think you can make it multi-purpose when you're also addressing religion in other areas, because again, it's client centered. It's about the client and not you.
If you think that a certain activity might go against your beliefs, really recognizing that you're not you're not participating in this religious activity. You're helping somebody be able to re-engage in it. And, if you have clear boundaries, that's fine, but you really have to communicate that with your supervisor or help somebody find a practitioner that is willing to do things with them. I think the most critical things are, not abandoning a client or flat out refusing to do something without conversation, because I've seen that happen. And like, that's just, in my opinion, completely unacceptable for, anyone listening and what they can put into practice.
So I would say not to underestimate the power that spirituality and religion can have on our clients, and to we don't have to be religious or spiritual ourselves to use our therapeutic use of self for our clients. We can use it regardless of whether we're religious or spiritual, and whether our religion or spirituality, whether or not it matches that of our clients. I think it's really kind of tapping into what is important. So use it to the client. So really kind of remaining client-centered and taking that holistic approach, and not being afraid to kind of really dig into the religion and spirituality, and using your therapeutic use of self for the benefit of the client.
I just think in general, learning about different cultures, religion, practices really takes time. It takes patience, because you also have to process it and kind of reflect on it at times if something is foreign to you. I just recommend that people try to actively learn instead of just people expecting to tell you at the same time, because it's great to that you have that, like people telling you, but also making the effort to learn about things that are foreign to you is also a good place to start. And surrounding yourself with people who may not be from the same background or who may not have the same lived experiences, because your experience is also a lived experience, and you can like incorporating that therapeutic use of self also comes from your lived experiences as well. And just being open and respectful about all different beliefs, even if they don't align with yours, because what's meaningful to you is not always going to be meaningful to someone else. And it's just how we are as individuals.
Between the US and the UK, we know that there is very little diversity in the OT profession. And so, some of us have bubbles where everybody looks just like us, and there isn't much diversity. And so I think if that's you, then it's really important. I mean, it's really important for all of us, but especially if you don't really have access to people from different backgrounds, from different parts of the world, with different religious and spiritual experiences, is to truly be curious. Sometimes it feels like it's rude or disrespectful to ask questions if you don't really know how to frame the question, or you really don't know much about that person's culture and background, because you haven't lived it, because you haven't seen it. But if you're asking in a curious and respectful way, most people are open to telling you more. So if you really want to learn more about the person, then they're willing to tell you more about it. So it's really about how you're approaching it. So I wanted to thank you both so much for your time, sharing your experiences, and getting into this really important conversation. I wanted to ask if people wanted to reach you, what is the best way?
Thank you, Sheila, for having me. It was a great conversation. I have my Instagram page where I can be reached. The handle is the Hijabi OT. So I can be reached through messaging over there.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila. This has been great. If anyone wants to reach me, they can contact me via Twitter at Dinuli15. So that's DINULI and then 15.
I'm Sheila. If you want to get a hold of me, I am on Instagram at OT Bay Area, and as well on Twitter. And if you want to learn more about my work, my website is otbayarea.com. If you enjoyed this content, please like and subscribe, and do let us know if there's anything you want to learn more about. Thank you.